MCU characters who became way more popular than anyone expected. The MCU is full of iconic characters. While it may be difficult to remember, some were never expected to get as massively popular as they've become. The MCU is filled with characters who are now iconic household names, but some of the biggest breakout heroes and villains became much more famous than most expected. Though it may be difficult to imagine now, several now popular characters in the MCU were relatively obscure, at least comparatively to their status now, names before their MCU debuts. The movies of the MCU Iron Man, from moderately popular to international icon Tony Stark, was far from an unknown before Iron Man kick-started the MCU in 2008. But he was markedly more niche and nowhere near the A-list hero with worldwide name recognition that he was today. Iron Man did headline his own animated series in the 1990s, but it was never as popular as other shows like X-Men, the animated series, and hasn't had the same lasting cultural impact. While hopes were obviously high for Iron Man to start a franchise, few expected him to skyrocket as a character like he did. Of course, much of that success is solely on the back of the decision to cast the at-the-time risky Robert Downey Jr. as Tony. Stark was previously a more straightforward and stern businessman in Marvel Comics, but RDJ's signature wit and delivery utterly transformed the character across media. Iron Man likely would have been a success with someone else in the role due to solid effects, an effective story, and an exciting spectacle, but it's unlikely Iron Man would become one of Marvel's most iconic heroes. Loki from standard villain to multiverse. Hero Loki has been a mainstay in Thor comics for quite some time, but it's unlikely many anticipated his long-running role and wonderful character arc in the MCU. Loki's debut in Thor and later antagonist role in the Avengers was likely planned from the start, but Loki's MCU timeline from then on was almost surely in response to an incredibly public reception. Loki could have easily been a fairly two-dimensional villain, but Hiddleston's nuanced delivery brought depth to the troubled god of mischief. It's saying something that headlining an Avengers movie as the main villain isn't Loki's most iconic MCU appearance. Pushing further into firm anti-hero territory in Thor, Ragnarok, and going out as a hero in Avengers, Infinity War signaled growth, but the character's best content came in Loki, seasons 1 and 2. Loki's meteoric rise looks obvious in hindsight, but there's another world in which he's taken to Asgard at the end of the Avengers and never featured in more than a cameo after that, without Hiddleston's brilliant performance. Star-Lord, an effective reinvention. The MCU seemed like an unstoppable box office behemoth back in 2014, but Guardians of the Galaxy was still a huge gamble. The early MCU contained plenty of sci-fi and fantasy elements, but they were presented in a more grounded package not unfamiliar to general fans of action and comedy movies. Guardians of the Galaxy dove deep into bizarre sci-fi featuring the MCU's strangest characters to date. Moreover, changing Star-Lord from a gruff and grizzled character to the lovable goofball who appeared on screen certainly helped. Like many entries in this list, much of the character's success can be attributed to wonderful acting. Coming off his breakout role in Parks and Recreation, Chris Pratt imbues Peter Quill with earnestness and charm that may not have come through from another actor. Of course, equal credit goes to the writing and directing of James Gunn. The character's MCU future is unknown, but audiences have been promised that the legendary Star-Lord will return. 10 years ago, an obscure comic character played by an unproven movie star didn't seem likely to have such staying power. Doctor Strange. Far more popular in the MCU, Doctor Strange was a relatively late addition to the MCU's Infinity Saga, and there was little doubt he'd be a hit. With unique magical abilities, and played by the acclaimed Benedict Cumberbatch, the master of the mystic arts had a lot going for him. However, few expected that he'd go on to be one of the most important characters in the MCU, especially so quickly. Strange was an instrumental part of Avengers, Infinity War, and he seems positioned to be a crucial character in the upcoming Avengers, the Kang Dynasty. With the deaths or pseudo-retirements of several early established Avengers, Strange is now a veteran hero in the MCU. His popularity is only set to increase if his knowledge of the multiverse proves as important as it seems in the MCU Phase 6, and perhaps beyond. Captain America, a difficult adaptation. Captain America was an established and well-known hero before his introduction into the MCU, but adapting him to the big screen was an imposing proposition that came with no guarantees of success. Though Steve is often a nuanced character in the comics, pop culture portrayals of him were often as a one-dimensional hyper-patriot, and that just isn't enough to lead a multi-billion-dollar franchise. However, along with Iron Man and Thor, good acting and writing transcended these worries. Chris Evans was a bit of a gamble to play Steve Rogers, given his history was primarily composed of teen comedies and the divisive Fantastic Four movies of the early to mid-2000s. However, Evans immediately proved doubts wrong, bringing palpable heart and heroism to Steve. Even years after his apparent franchise end in Avengers Endgame, Captain America remains one of the biggest on-screen superheroes ever. Black Panther, from well-known to truly iconic T'Challa, has been an important leader in Marvel Comics for decades, but that only partially translated to real-world recognition. While many could have identified the character by his iconic superhero suit, the name T'Challa was far from one with household popularity. It's no surprise that the character and his debut movie did well, but just how well was a bit of a surprise. Black Panther earned a massive $1.35 billion at the global box office and remains the highest-rated MCU movie on Rotten Tomatoes, with a critic score of 96%. The late Chadwick Boseman truly embodied the regal kindness of T'Challa, but also infused him with subtle flaws that made him feel more real. Black Panther was an important milestone in representation, but it was also a wildly entertaining film, and T'Challa remains iconic even after his MCU departure. And so, dear friends, we've journeyed through the highs and lows, the triumphs and tragedies of our beloved Marvel Cinematic Universe characters. From the valiant sacrifices of heroes like Iron Man and Black Widow, to the resilient spirit of Captain America and the cosmic adventures of the Guardians of the Galaxy, each character has left an indelible mark on our hearts and minds. So let us bid farewell to these unforgettable characters with gratitude for the joy, inspiration, and excitement they've brought into our lives. And subscribe to our channel for the next chapter in the epic saga of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.